It's fall 2001. Residing at Gunma Prefecture was a 27-year-old man named Reki Kawahara. With no prior experience in writing, he decided to apply for the 9th Dengeki Game Novel Prize. As out of reach that goal seemed, he was still determined and got to work immediately. His inspiration came from all the MMO games he's played, including Ultima Online and Ragnarok Online. And in 2002, he finished his novel. The final product was called Sword Art Online. Unfortunately for him, he exceeded the page limit by 120 pages and ultimately did not turn in his submission. So, with his unsubmitted work, he instead published it as a web novel under the alias Kanori Fumio. It was received well by his viewers. That positive feedback gave him the motivation to create more arcs and stories, expanding the series up until he finished the Alicization arc in 2008. From there on, he started working on his Sword Art Online light novel series, and it's still being created to this day. There are also many spin-off SAO light novel series. Progressive, written by Kawahara, Gunge Online, written by Keiichi Sejisawa, and Clover's Regret, written by Watase Soichiro. From a series that started as an entry for a competition, to becoming a wide expansive universe full of stories to tell. Against all odds, Reki Kawahara created one of the most popular light novel series of all time. It was so popular, it netted itself its own anime. This was the result. Just like the light novel, it too was a success. But following its success came its large share of hatred towards it. This show split the anime community in two, people who love it and people who hate it. But why does it have this very polarized reception? How did a show create such a huge debate over a large community? What led up to this point? To understand why, we need to go straight to the source. The show starts off with a video game headset called the Nerve Gear getting released to the public. The Nerve Gear is able to utilize full dive technology to make the player fully immerse themselves in the environment. Alongside the release of the Nerve Gear is a game called Sword Art Online, or SAO for short. Sword Art Online is a fictional MMO, or massively multiplayer online style video game, in which players scale up the 100 floors of Aincrad in order to beat the game. The catch, however, is that the players are unable to log out of the game because the creator Kaiba Akihiko intentionally programmed it this way. To escape, all 100 floors of Aincrad must be cleared. If a player dies in game, they die in real life. The premise is very simple, but really interesting. Problem is, MMOs typically don't have an end. So an MMO with a discernible end is bad game design. However, without that ending, the show, or arc in this case, will last forever. Nevertheless, knowing that there's an end in sight gives the audience something to look forward to. Typically with isekai anime, a prevalent theme is escapism. However, the show takes another approach towards the topic. The players of SAO use the game as a form of escapism. Unfortunately for them, they had to escape from the place they wanted to escape to. How ironic, but clever. We follow the main character Kirito throughout his quest to try and clear the game. The first few episodes are pretty solid. It sets the tone of the anime, and it shows us what to expect. No character is safe from death, and it really gives off the feeling of not knowing what to expect next, which is one of the really strong points of the show. This keeps the audience invested. However, some of the characters that Kirito meets in SAO are shallow, and don't add anything to the overall story. It's fine to have characters that don't contribute to the story, but at least make them interesting. The writers could have given characters like Silica and Liz more involvement, or made them characters we would care about in an emotional way, kind of like Sachi. Although by the end of each of their respective episodes, we understand them better, they don't have the development that would make the audience care or resonate with them, because they just have one episode that specifically focuses on them, and that's it. Like, they aren't horrible characters. They just feel very dull and uninteresting due to the lack of screen time and roles they play, outside the episode where they formally debut. Now let's get to our main character. Kirito remains independent throughout SAO due to his entire guild getting mercilessly slaughtered, and he doesn't want to relive that experience again. He sticks with the front lines, clearing floors and progressing the game, but other than that, he acts on his own. Up until Asuna forces him to team up with her, they spend a lot of time together. So much so where they eventually get married. Kinda good character progression on Kirito's end, going from only playing solo to slowly opening up to others. A noteworthy scene that stood out to me was when the character Kurdeal paralyzes Kirito and the character Godfrey by poisoning the water they drank from. Then he proceeds to kill Godfrey and attempts to take out Kirito as well. On the brink of death, Asuna swoops in just in time to save him. This entire sequence of events really took me aback. You could really feel the fear by just looking at Kurdeal's face. This was one of the more memorable scenes in my opinion. It was just really well executed and it stood out for me. The highlights of this arc are definitely the fight scenes. The intensity, the action, the animation, the character's emotions, you can feel it. The fight that stands out the most is Kirito versus the 474 boss, Gleamize. All the colors, choreography, and the overall animation at the time was just stellar. It still looks good to this day, and it stood the test of time. Though, not all fight scenes are created equal, but the ones that do stand out are a treat to watch. The whole honeymoon phase was alright. It was a decent change of pace from all the fighting. Nothing in particular stood out. Now, the way the Aincrad arc ended was not so great. Kirito figures out that the character, Heathcliff, is actually Kaiba Akihiko in disguise. With his administrative powers, Kaiba proceeds to paralyze everyone aside from Kirito, and the two of them have a fight to the death. If Kirito won, the game would be cleared, but if he lost, the game would continue. Kaiba has Kirito by the ropes. Then Asuna comes in to take the hit, and dies. How did she break out of administrative paralysis? That shouldn't be possible. Devastated, Kirito just stands there, getting killed himself. But for some reason he comes back to life to finish Kaiba off. At this point, all logic gets thrown out the window. How did Kirito come back to life? The most logical conclusion is that Klein, even though he was paralyzed, used a revival item that he obtained earlier in the arc to revive Kirito. But the thing is, there's no indication or sign that he did use the revival item, so that hypothesis is probably wrong. However, the answer lies in the next arc, which will be touched upon later. When Kirito came back, he rejected the system's order to die. Well, that's not how technology works. The writers were probably thinking, how should we kill our main character while keeping him alive in the most inexplicable way possible? And that's the weakest part of this arc. The writing. There are so many plot holes in the show that lead to having more questions than answers. It was likely to make the anime more entertaining, but in my opinion, sacrificing rational thinking for entertainment was a really poor choice on their end. The arc had so much wasted potential. They could have done so much more to make it really good, or even a masterpiece. Not to say that the arc was bad, far from it. There are many things to appreciate about the Aincrad arc. The fight scenes, the character interactions, Kirito and Asuna's blossoming relationship. It's when you get into the more broader aspects where the Aincrad arc loses its edge. The idea and concepts were fantastic, but the execution? Not so much. Now, here's where things start to get bumpy. The whole you die in game, you die in real life aspect is gone. It takes away the risk factor, which was the main thing that brought in such a huge audience. It gets replaced with the frequently used risky romance trope. Pretty unfortunate considering Sword Art Online is a show that had high expectations. So it turns out that Asuna is still trapped in her nerve gear, and Kirito has to get her out before she marries a creep named Sugo. Since Asuna was still in a coma, Sugo took advantage of the opportunity to try and marry her without her consent. So Kirito tries to rescue her by diving into the game Alfheim Online, which was where her virtual self was imprisoned. We get introduced to Kirito's cousin, Suguha. While SAO was still happening, a new full dive system was created called the Atmosphere, which she bought and went by the alias of Lifa. When Kirito meets Lifa in Alfheim Online, he doesn't know that it was actually his cousin, and vice versa. This creates an interesting dynamic between the two. The Fairy Dance arc has a lot of filler that was pretty unneeded. It mainly consists of fan service, unnecessary fights, and introducing characters who aren't important to the story that hardly show up at all. I feel like they added these unnecessary parts to make the arc longer. Adding some filler to a show is fine, but here, I feel like there's way too much and they should have gone right to the point rather than focusing on other things. I don't like how our antagonist doesn't show up too often. Sugo experiments on human memories, emotions, and senses of the 300 SAO survivors he rebouted. That sounds really nefarious, and I'm pretty sure people would want to know how, but instead, we just catch glimpses of what he's done. Some of the useless filler should have been replaced with what Sugo was doing. It would give the audience a good idea for what his intentions are. Also, the way Kirito was able to overcome Sugo was simply by seeing Kaiba Akihiko in his head, and telling him that based off their fight in SAO, the human will can be stronger than the system. So Kirito gets up and uses voice commands to revoke Sugo's administrator status and summon the legendary Excalibur. Since Kirito is able to break the boundaries for both SAO and ALO, Kaiba and Sugo are the biggest dunces in the world. The only possible reason as to why human will is a factor in the game is because it was given a variable that would measure it. Don't know why you would add that to a game. They also had to have made a feature in which if you had a high enough human will, you can override anything in the game, which is one of the dumbest things ever. It's just as dumb as Bowser putting an axe at the end of the bridge. I still can't believe the human will served to be the MacGuffin and why Kirito was able to overpower the system. A lot of the time, villains do stupid things with their plans and that ends up becoming their downfall. But this one takes the cake. There is a really big problem with the overall tone of this arc. It mainly comes from two things in the story, which I won't explicitly say due to the magnitude of the topics. But these two topics really make us question what the target audience was in the first place. The Aincrad arc dives into topics such as grief and relationships. These topics give us a good idea of what the target audience would be, which is teenagers. With this tone, we should expect similar topics in other arcs, but instead, these two topics come out of nowhere and really shifts the tone to something more controversial. This arc is a downgrade in almost every way from the previous one. There are a couple of things that the arc does a good job with. One of them is taking a more linear and consistent approach in telling the story, rather than the scattered pacing of the Aincrad arc. There's also Kirito's character consistency, where he does retain the fact that he will do anything to prevent someone from dying, and that he's OP. It does have its moments, but doesn't save it from being bad. I personally like this arc. It surrounds the mystery of Death Gun, a mysterious player from the game Gunge Online, or GGO for short. He's known for killing people in real life after killing them in the game, and it's up to Kirito to discover the secrets of Death Gun. Kirito isn't the central character this time around. Instead, the spotlight goes to Sinon, a talented sniper in GGO. But the ironic thing is that she suffers from PTSD after shooting a bank robber dead when she was little. This traumatic experience gave her nightmares and made her scared of guns. Because of this, some mean girls at school bully her. To escape from her dissatisfied life, she looks to GGO. Since GGO is a shooting game, she uses that game to help with her gun phobia. Sinon is the first character to be fleshed out and have character development. This arc goes back to the high risk involved, since people's lives are at stake due to the killings by Death Gun. Death Gun himself is an interesting villain. Just like his older brother Darth Vader, he always has this intimidating presence with a mysterious aura surrounding him because his identity was unknown. But rather than having one person encapsulating the persona, there are multiple people pulling the strings. I almost thought that the writers would take the nonsensical route and make a stupid reasoning as to how people were getting killed, but fortunately, they took the logical approach and made Death Gun's identity make sense. I think Death Gun's character was fine. He reminds me of Zero from Code Geass. The way that he was able to kill players is pretty simple, but scientifically interesting. First, one of the people behind the Death Gun persona gains the information of a player in the real world. Some of the information included their address. They go to the player's house and wait for them to get killed in the game. The player has no idea that a killer is at their living quarters since they're immersed in the game. Then the moment the player dies in the game by the hands of Death Gun, the person who infiltrates their house kills them. And after a thorough autopsy of the corpse, the report states that the person died due to heart failure. The thing they were killed by was from a syringe containing the substance called succinylcholine. Succinylcholine is a depolarizing skeletal muscle relaxant used for anesthesia. It causes short-term paralysis, which helps with tracheal intubation or electroconvulsive therapy. Succinylcholine circulates in the blood and reaches nicotinic receptors on the surface of muscle cells. It imitates the action of acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that our nerves naturally release to make our muscles move. Once given, the patient quickly has all their muscles twitch and becomes depolarized. It makes muscles twitch to the point where you can't blink or breathe. Ventilation is needed to keep the airflow through the body. Without it, the consequence is a heart attack. That was how Death Gun was able to kill people in the real world. I'm kinda glad that Kirito and Sinon didn't get any plot armor. The arc definitely benefited from not having it due to it being a huge problem in the last season, where there was way too much of it. There's a little gripe I have with this arc, and it's the whole battle royale portion of it. Now, all the action sequences are pretty good, and I like the interactions between Kirito and Sinon. The problem is that I felt like it dragged on for a little too long. I felt like there was a little too much waiting around and talking. Hell, Kirito and Sinon spent an entire episode in a cave. If they upped the pacing, it would have made the whole thing feel more jam-packed and thrilling. Other than that nitpick, it's a massive improvement over the previous arc. The focus on both Death Gun and Sinon kept things interesting. It strikes a good balance between action and story. This arc is definitely one of the more entertaining ones, and it's pretty well rounded in all of its aspects. We're skipping the Excalibur arc due to being all filler and there's nothing really to talk about. So next is my personal favorite arc of the series, Mother Rosario. It's vastly different from all the other arcs, but it has the deepest and most emotional story. It dives into more personal experiences many of us have had. With the anime mainly consisting of action sequences and tense moments, this was a nice change of pace. The central character this time around is Asuna. It focuses her relationships between her mom and Yuki. First, let's talk about the relationship with Yuki. Yuki is part of the Sleeping Knights, a guild that Asuna joins. They added her to the guild in order to help defeat a floor boss and to make one last memory together. It turns out Yuki and all the other Sleeping Knights were terminally ill patients who've been in the full dive system even before SAO commenced. Asuna helped her enjoy life and appreciate things that she wasn't able to before, like go to school. They have a sisterly relationship. You can see it in the way they interact and encourage each other. Yuki even goes as far as to call Asuna her sister because she reminded her of her older deceased twin sister. Unfortunately, Yuki was going to see the same fate, due to her not having much time left. The scene where Yuki passes away was particularly sad. Yuki is a grim reminder that you never know when your life is going to end, so you should live your life to the fullest. On October 27, 2004, Kawahara made an interesting blog post regarding Yuki. When trying to have the Mother Rosario arc focus on the themes of medical care and virtual technology, he created Yuki, a character with a terminal illness. He was pretty ignorant about these diseases and informed himself. His experiences in trying to learn about these conditions is evident with how he structures the story's narrative. It shows us Kawahara struggling to grasp the topic and himself reflecting on it. The reason why I bring this up is because I found it fascinating how Kawahara came up with this arc in particular. It almost feels experimental with how he approached the story from the rest. Now we're going to talk about the relationship between Asuna and her mother. Her mom is one of those parents that want to make their children do what they want. She doesn't like Asuna's education route, playing too many video games, and her relationship with Kirito. So she takes extra measures to ensure that the path Asuna would take would lead to what her mom desires. Asuna was helpless and distraught because of this, until Yuki came along and encouraged her to stand up for herself and speak up. This gave Asuna the confidence she needed to face her mom. She brings her mom to the virtual world and shows her a log cabin that she owned, which is reminiscent of her mother's childhood. Then, Asuna tells that her parents were proud of what she was able to accomplish and was welcome to their house at any time. Her mom gets a reality check by getting told that life was not just about working for oneself, but it's to work for other people's sake as well. Asuna tells her that she wants to lead a life in which she is able to support everyone around her. Realizing everything that her parents have done for her, Asuna's mother breaks down, and from there, her mom is fine with whatever path her daughter takes. Their relationship is conveying the comparison between the American mentality and Japanese mentality. America is an individualistic culture, which is a society that prioritizes the individual over a group. They value independence over cooperation. There's also the American dream belief, which is no matter where you were born or which social class you were born into, anyone can attain their own version of success. It's achieved through risk-taking and hard work. On the opposite end, we have Japan, that emphasize a concept called omoiyari. According to Kazuya Hara from Meika University, omoiyari is an individual's sensitivity to imagine another's feelings and personal affairs, including his or her circumstances. Japanese people seem to be less individualistic and more conforming. With wanting to work for other people's sake and showing how much she cares for people, Asuna has the Japanese mentality, and with how she became successful and what she did to obtain her goals, her mom represents the American mentality. I found this comparison between the two relationships to be very interesting, as it takes the relationship between two people and makes a visual representation between opposite mindsets. I feel that this is the best relationship in the series. It has a blend of clashing mentalities, family troubles, and a powerful message with a side of sentimentality to boot. All this forms a relationship where you actually care about the characters, understand how they feel, and to a degree, relate to them. There's just one minor issue about this arc. For me, I personally don't find this an issue, but for others, they might, so I'll mention it here. The show shifted from an action-oriented one to a more character-oriented one. Before the Mother Rosario arc, Sword Art Online focused heavily on its action and fast pace, which was part of what made people like the show. Changing it to a slower pace and giving it a more mellow tone probably lost the investment from a lot of its audience, and that's what hurt this arc the most. Other than that, it's a solid arc with a simple story. A simple yet emotional story that does a great job in fleshing out character relationships through personal conflicts. Definitely the most compelling arc of the series.
Let's go!
4 years later, the Alicization arc gets released. It feels as if they totally revamped the first season. Right off the bat, I don't like how Alicization starts off with this. There's literally zero context as to why it begins with Kirito as a kid and in this computer simulated world. Yeah, they tell us what happens later down the road, but first impressions are key, and my first impression didn't sit so well. All shows pretty much give zero context at the very start, but it's always at the very beginning of the series. When anime transitions from season to season, it either carries over from the previous season or they start up a new story with some reasoning behind it. In my opinion, this first episode would work better as a first episode of an entire series, not season. The writer should have at least shown us some context as to why Kirito's a kid, who these people are, or how they got there. There's one interesting thing about it though. Before, we, the audience, knew what was going on. Now, we have no idea, and even Kirito feels the same way, which is probably what the writers were intending. This builds a bit of a connection between the audience and Kirito. Even though it does create that connection, I think it was still a poor choice on their end. The story this time around has Kirito living a virtual life in the Underworld due to him getting hit with some succinylcholine from the last member of the Laughing Coffin Guild. Before going any further, I want to explain the system Kirito is using to dive into the virtual world because it gets talked about a lot and I want to provide some context as it does play a role in the overall story. I'm gonna make it easier to understand and not go over the very specific stuff. So Kirito has been testing out a new full dive system from the company Wrath, and it was designed differently from all the other ones. The machine being used to allow the user to utilize the full dive technology is called the Soul Translator. The main difference between the Soul Translator and the other full dive technology is that it functions by interacting with the user's fluctlight. A fluctlight is a person's consciousness or soul. The Soul Translator translates the information contained within the fluctlight into something a computer can read. The other difference is that it does not use polygons for 3D models. Instead, it uses mnemonic visual data to realize the sensations of the virtual world. That's pretty much the basic idea of how Soul Translators work. The story has a character named Alice who accidentally goes into the dark territory. This breaks a rule from something called the Taboo Index, which is a set of laws that people must abide by. Later, she gets arrested by people called the Integrity Knights. Kirito and his best friend Yujiro become swordsmen. Soon, Kirito and Yujiro get thrown into jail because they broke the Taboo Index. Although, what they were trying to do was justified because they were trying to save 2 girls. I felt like this was almost a repeat of the Fairy Dance arc, but it flipped the script on us when it turns out Alice became an Integrity Knight. The Integrity Knights themselves were pretty interesting characters. They are people who lost their memories and are being manipulated by Quinella as a tool. Even though they are essentially puppets, they still felt human. When they fought with Kirito and Yujiro, they were reminded that they have a past and soon recollect their memories. They were written in a way in which we, the audience, would feel sympathetic towards them, and the writers succeeded in doing so. I feel like the writers did a better job in writing these characters than our protagonist here. Yujiro was a nice addition to the character list. He felt pretty impactful in comparison to some of the other characters. His character progression is really good too, going from tree cutter for life to becoming a swordsman. Even though Kirito is the main character once more, I think Yujiro gets his fair share in the spotlight. Diverging the focus between them was a good choice. The time skip could have been better implemented because it felt pretty sudden. I feel like a short montage would have been nice, showing how Kirito and Yujiro worked their way up through the ranks. It would ease the audience into knowing how they got to that point. The writers did a great job in the world building aspect, introducing different parts of the Underworld. It helps set up both this season and the next season. There were good amounts of world building in the other seasons, but with the 3rd and 4th, there's a whole lot more. It keeps expanding and it really pulls the viewer into its world. The last quarter of the season was fine. There are a couple of notable moments, but nothing really jumps out. Except I think the last episode was pretty good. And Yujiro's death, that was pretty sad. It ends on a great cliffhanger, transitioning into the next season. A lot of people say that this arc is a breath of fresh air, likely due to it being different but feeling familiar at the same time, which I agree. The writers wanted to try and change things up with their series to make it fresh, and I commend them for that. Pretty good arc, but not the best. War of Underworld was split into 2 seasons, but I'll talk about both of them here. The enemies from the Dark Territory of the Underworld plan to attack the Human Empire. I'm happy about how the Dark Territory gets some focus. In all the other arcs, we were left in the dark about the villains up until near the middle or end. But here, we learn some interesting things about them. Even though the Dark Territory are the bad guys, they aren't the main antagonist. The main antagonists are actually the leader of Laughing Coffin, known as Poe, or the Prince of Hell, and this guy named Gabriel Miller, who is known for being the winner of the 1st and 4th Bullet of Bullet tournaments. The reason why the 2 of them went into the Underworld was to steal Alice's Fluctlight. Alice is actually an acronym for Artificial Libel Intelligent Cybernetic Existence. She is an AI that is said to be capable of advancing Japan's military. It does make sense that some people would want to possess such a thing. They wanted to obtain Alice in order to give it to the Americans because they were working under them. Kirito actually doesn't play a huge role until near the end of the arc because for 3/4 of it, he's in a vegetative state due to the aftermath of the previous season. The story has the reverted Integrity Knights and the rest of the human army ready to wage war against the Dark Territory. There's nothing really special about this arc. It's just one big final battle, and there isn't really much you can do with that. We see characters from all different seasons of SAO come together to take down the villains and protect the Underworld. Poe gets a bunch of American, Chinese, and Korean people to play the game, saying that the Japanese people hacked it. This is all part of Poe's plan to eliminate the Japanese players to where he sounds like a certain German dictator. But he also had an ulterior motive, which was to get revenge towards Kirito. They played safe this arc, with them not doing anything new or experimental, and progressed the plot in a way which seems most logical. It wasn't bad at all, but they didn't do anything to really pull me in. I also felt like the focus was all over the place, from all the different battles that happen in the Underworld to what's going on in the real world. The ending personally felt a bit lacking because I feel like it should have ended with Kirito not going back into full dive systems and living a more fulfilling life. This is due to all the stuff he's been through because of full dive systems. I wish there was more to the ending rather than them going back into the Underworld to see how much civilization has progressed in there. The final season was fine. Nothing much else to say because there honestly isn't that much to talk about because it's mostly just fighting.
Now, say my name.
The character writing is one of the things that damaged this show the most. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The characters have no personality. There's no distinctive traits that would deem them of having a personality. Asuna did have a personality at the start of SAO. She was a tsundere, as she had the personality traits fitting the description for one. But when she gets together with Kirito, that tsundere personality she once had was lost. From the first season, she went from being a strong tsundere swordswoman to becoming just wife material, and finally becoming a damsel in distress. This may be character progression, but it's actually character retrogression. Asuna is the only character with this backwards development. The SAO cast has no personality characteristics that distinguish themselves among one another. Now, I'm not saying that every character must have a distinguishable personality. The problem arises when just about all of them have no characteristic that would make them stand out. And no, being OP is not a personality trait. Speaking of Kirito, there are so many negative things I can say about him. In the beginning, he looked like a promising main character. He had a simple goal in mind, to clear the game. He was a beta tester who got to understand SAO before anyone else can. I wish his beta tester ordeal would have been used more. Rather than show his prowess and strength, he should have shown it through knowledge. That would have been more logical. Take for example Mewtwo King. In the late 2000s, Mewtwo King was the best Super Smash Bros. Melee player. Skill-wise, he was not the best. The reason why he became the best was because of his immense knowledge about the game. He experimented with many parts of the game physics, attacks, options. He wanted to play as optimally as possible. He played like a robot. Because of his deep knowledge about the game, he shot to the top. That is the kind of development I wish Kirito had.
People are cleaning up after him. People remind him to bring his coat. They buy him food. They worship him. And usually people wouldn't give him the time of the day. But now that he's a god of this game, people will do anything that he wants. The power that he holds by being so excellent, you have to respect it.
I'm like proof that a nobody can become number one.
He remained independent throughout most of SAO because his entire guild died and doesn't want to relive that in case it does happen again. So, he compartmentalizes himself. That's a good start to his character, but as the episodes go on, he doesn't have the same emotions or drive he felt after the members of his guild died in vain. They focus on the fact that he always played solo rather than why. There are some throwbacks of it, but I feel like they should have referenced it more often, or even better, translate the struggles he felt back then both mentally and physically. His entire guild died and he had a huge burden to carry. It was a pivotal moment for him as, for the first time in the death game, he found some people that he could call his friends. For all of them to get wiped out was heartbreaking to the point where the feeling of guilt he had should be echoed throughout the rest of the episodes. He shouldn't just talk about it with Asuna. His solemn attitude should be progressive and developed, rather than hidden. In the final season, Kirito finally gets some form of development through him showing that he does live with survival guilt. This character building should have been done in at least season 1. There's also the fact that almost every girl he meets hits on him or has a crush on him. We get it, okay? He has a lot of charisma. Another big problem with Kirito is that he's really unrelatable. I'm not saying a character needs to be relatable in order for them to be good. He just has nothing stopping him, and the fact that he has no flaws, it creates such a disconnected character. Compared to other OP characters like Mob and Saitama, they have internal conflicts which make them feel relatable because all of us have parts of ourselves that we struggle with. Mob and Saitama are written in a way in which we want to root for them. Kirito, on the other hand, has no flaws and has nothing going for him other than his wide array of skills he possesses. Having a character with no flaws is, ironically, a big flaw. There were so many missed opportunities in giving him the development he needed. He's a character with failed potential. From the whole cast of characters, we just have one character that gets actual character development, which is Sinon. She actually has something that she struggles with. She tries to overcome those struggles and we see it firsthand. The characters that survive through SAO aren't internally struggling or doing anything to help themselves grow. Now you may be saying that they were actually externally struggling and that they've changed after getting out of the game, but there's no difference from how they acted in the game and how they act in the real world. Usually after something traumatic like that, they would become whole new people, but nope, they stayed the same. Fortunately, the characters in the later arcs are built upon much more, revealing their backstories and building somewhat of a connection to the audience. The same thing can't be said about the villains. They're just so bland. I wish there was more complexity with them because we never understood them as characters. They are very simple characters that feel one-dimensional with how they present themselves. The way they were written overall is very weak. A thing that makes up for the characters being stale are the character interactions. Now those are quite entertaining. It does a good job in keeping the audience engaged with the show from its funny, sad, and romantic moments. It keeps the show interesting. Other than that, the characters for the most part are pretty dull. I'm gonna cover the first 2 seasons' animation separately from the third because of how different the styles are. Although they look vastly different, they were both animated by the well-respected A1 Pictures. Let's go over the first 2 seasons. The art is really nice. It's colorful, sharp, and there's a good amount of detail that goes into it. At the time of its release, SAO's animation was really solid and looked better than other anime that came out at the time. The fight scenes are where the visuals peaked. The Aincrad arc's animations are far more superior than all the other arcs. Now the animation for the other arcs aren't bad, it's just that it doesn't live up to the standard the Aincrad arc brought. The art is really dynamic and flashy. There's so much life in the colors. On top of all that, there's a lot of polish that makes it look fresh. With all of the other arcs, their animations are missing some of those things that made it look nice in the first place. I also noticed that Season 2 used lower saturation, making the art look a bit more organic. The quality is a bit inconsistent, but it's still very good. The Alicization arc is where the visuals change up a fair amount. If you thought that the animation was really colorful back in the Aincrad arc, well, it gets even more colorful from here. It feels as if the animators wanted to bring back the spectacles from the Aincrad arc and blow it out of the water. Everything from the colors to the character designs. The glow-ups on the characters are very well done. They look so lively and vibrant. The animation itself has improved. There's much more flow and fluidity. All of these factors are why the Alicization visuals are much better than the previous seasons. During the War of Underworld arc, some of the animation in the fights reminded me of Mob Psycho style a little bit. Overall, SAO's animation is good. There's nothing noticeably bad about it and it's quite appealing to look at. It may not look as good as other anime, but it still looks pretty nice. For me, Sword Art Online is an alright show. It's a show that you can turn your brain off to and just enjoy. Critically, it's not a very good show. But from an entertainment standpoint, it's quite the contrary. There are some pretty hype and exciting moments, but there are a lot of flaws that cripple the show from being great. Even though there are lots of problems, it doesn't mean it was bad. If it was so bad, it wouldn't be so popular. This leads us to our next topic. There are many polarized anime that exist, but none have reached the heights that Sword Art Online has achieved. What did it have that other shows didn't? How did it get so popular? What kind of impact did SAO make on the industry? To find out all of this, we need to look at something that revolutionized how we play video games. At the time, VRs were a hot trend. Immersing yourself in a simulated world is what dreams are made of. Before, you were inputting controls through controllers, watching how things play out. With VRs, you got to be in it. It's interactive, immersive, and above all else, special. Technology has come a long way to get to this point. Now let's take it a step further. Imagine VRs, but instead of everything being simulated and fake, it looks and feels real. This is where full dive technology comes into play. In VRs, you move around in a 360-degree environment however you want, but in full dive, you can move every part of your body without any restrictions. You can feel everything around you and truly take in the surroundings. Technology like that sounds like a pipe dream for so many of us. And for a show to incorporate tech like that is awesome. It's comparable to The Matrix, which is my favorite movie of all time. Not only were VRs becoming really popular, they added the fact that SAO is an MMORPG game. Now, back in 2012, MMORPGs were already extremely popular. Games like RuneScape and World of Warcraft were bursting with millions of players around the globe. Hell, I played a lot of Adventure Quest Worlds back in that time. The late 2000s and early 2010s was a time in which MMORPGs were booming in growth. Sword Art Online incorporating gaming, VRs, and MMORPGs gave the show a formula for success, and success did it achieve. SAO was able to captivate different kinds of people due to it appealing towards a wide demographic. A YouTube channel called Treesicle did a great job in explaining how the show could be for all ages of people.
Why do people like SAO? Well, it's pretty fucking simple, people. It's a cool concept with entertaining fight scenes. The key word here is entertaining, not necessarily good. To get what I mean, you have to think about why most people are watching an anime or any TV show for that matter. Fans of SAO like the relaxed yet stimulating entertainment they get from it. I bet even people who hate SAO enjoy at least one show that's like this. It's that same feeling you get from watching sitcoms or game shows or, dare I say it, Let's Plays. Or yes, a lot of the videos on this channel. Fans of any of these genres aren't watching to actively engage their brain in thought or difficult concepts, they're just watching for pure entertainment. They aren't looking for intense meaning and deep characters, they aren't looking for something philosophical and life-altering. They want to relax and enjoy something that doesn't make the brain second-guess its own reality. Children who won't care about the plot are all about those pretty colors and cool fight scenes. Teenagers will take an interest in the slow-growing Asuna-Kirito relationship that explodes in a near-death experience. And both adolescents and adults can appreciate the brilliance of designing a story around being trapped in a virtual world.
They also go into the direction that SAO was trying to go for when it comes to entertainment. The reason why SAO was trying to hit all of these points was to make it appeal to everyone.
It's a basic form of entertainment, one that we see a lot of here on YouTube. It's appealing to the lowest common denominator, which means that it appeals to the widest variety of people. Children can enjoy it, teenagers can enjoy it, adults can enjoy it, men and women can enjoy it. But because of that, an idea that could have created something extremely unique and exceptional was instead written to make sure anyone could like it.
But when you try to appeal something for everyone, there will be drawbacks. With movies or video games rated PG or E respectively, everyone can enjoy it. But the main target audience is children. With Sword Art Online, they try to take those general ratings by having their target audience being much more broad. They add in themes and topics catered towards each age group, but it ends up being a jumbled mess. It's impossible to appeal to everyone, so you need to have a direction. I want to talk about the reception from each season. It's quite interesting when looking at it. So season 1 contains the Aincrad and Fairy Dance arcs. This is obviously the most popular season since it's the first. It mainly has mixed reactions and is widely criticized. People are mainly disappointed with the potential it had that it never tapped into. It felt like it could have been a long-running series because of the concept alone, making us expect it to be quite the journey. People also feel like they should have just stopped after the Aincrad arc because that ending felt pretty conclusive. Season 2 has the Phantom Bullet, Galber, and Mother Rosario arcs. Still a very popular season, but far more criticized. I'd say for the most part, it has a more negative reception. It has a much lower rating in general compared to all the other seasons. I believe it's likely due to 3 things. The first being that it felt so much different from the first arc with the whole setting shift. The next is having a higher emphasis on story over action that was more prevalent in the first season. These things are likely to bore both fans and haters alike. Lastly is people jumping on the hate bandwagon. Even though season 2 does clean up on season 1's problems when it comes to character writing and story, it performed worse because of the reasons above. Seasons 3 and 4 are received the best. Something to note is that less and less people kept watching up to this point. A lot of people stopped watching after season 2 because they were probably tired with the series. This is a possible cause for why these seasons have a more positive reception. Both are about equal when it comes to that aspect. For the people that kept watching, it was a pretty good experience. It's likely due to the series feeling reinvigorated and the writing being better overall. It keeps the viewer invested, even with the different conflicts that show up because it doesn't completely stray off from the primary one. The story also feels more complete in comparison to the other seasons. There's a lot more lore and information, making the story feel a lot more interesting. People still have problems with the Alicization arc, but there are much less of them because it fixes even more problems that SAO had. These are pretty much the general consensus for each season of SAO. I feel like seasons 1, 3, and 4 are received fairly, but season 2 got way too much unnecessary hate. I think it's okay not to like the Caliber arc because it's all filler, but people really glossed over the good aspects of season 2 and the things they fixed. It puts into perspective how people view Sword Art Online. They don't want any deviation from the formula of being trapped in another world. A lot of people aren't really watching Sword Art Online for the story or characters. They want to be enveloped by the cool fight scenes and animation. The stimulation and entertainment that SAO brings is what people come to watch. I want to introduce a spectrum I made when it comes to the availability of anime. The shows leaning on the left are the ones that are more general audience friendly. These are gateway anime. They are shows that help ease new viewers to the medium. They are not too weird, which would make people disregard the medium altogether, and are entertaining enough to keep people watching. There is a good reason as to why these anime are recommended to beginners. The ones toward the middle are anime that are more taste-based. These don't appeal to such a wide audience in comparison to the ones on the left. They are more dependent on what genres or styles you enjoy. These might not be your thing, or it's something you might appreciate if you've seen more anime. They generally aren't recommended for newcomers very often. The shows on the very right are ones that are hit or miss. The audience appeal is much smaller due to the nature of these anime. It mainly has to do with the amount of fan service shown. Either you'll like them or hate them. These are shows that definitely shouldn't be recommended for newcomers because they might disregard the medium entirely because of such an unusual or uncomfortable experience. Sword Art Online is kind of an outlier in the spectrum. It's a gateway anime, but also isn't. It has stuff that can appeal towards a wide audience, however, it has things that can turn people away from the show altogether. As I've said before, SAO tries to appeal to everyone by having things that would entertain each demographic. Sword Art Online gets people into anime with how entertaining it is. In media, entertainment is the most important part in grabbing somebody's attention. SAO is eloquent with its interactions, fight scenes, and concepts. Those things helped pull viewers into its world and kept them engaged. In Japanese culture, isekai means different world. The term isekai has been around for centuries. We can find the origins in ancient Japanese literature through the history of Urashima Taro. Other early instances include Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan from English folklore. These stories were a source of inspiration when it came to the creation of isekai anime, which could be traced back all the way to the mid-1980s. Before that time, magical girl shows like Sally the Witch and Magical Princess Minky Momo laid the foundation for the genre. Teleporting to another world and fighting monsters were some of the key elements of these anime, and those elements together evolved into what would be known as isekai. The first anime to be classified as an isekai was Aura Battler Dunbine in 1983. This would begin the golden age on the isekai timeline. Around this era, shows like Inuyasha and Magic Knight Rayearth became popular. This is where isekai established itself as a niche but known genre. After Inuyasha came a show that changed the landscape of the genre forever. Dot Hack would mark the beginning of the modernistic era. Although it wasn't the first in incorporating technology as part of its premise, it was the first in giving the video game feel. Even though there were no new isekai that were released in the same caliber, it set a new standard. But then came the release of Sword Art Online. This ushered in a new era of isekai. Sword Art Online was the catalyst that caused a surge of new isekai anime to appear. Shows like ReZero and Konosuba gained a lot of traction. There were so many new isekai anime being produced, the genre started to become oversaturated. This was the power of Sword Art Online. From 1983 to the release of SAO, there were 25 anime series created pertaining to the isekai genre. That is 25 series within a 29-year span, averaging 0.86 shows per year. After the release of Sword Art Online to the end of 2020, there have been 47 new isekai shows. In just 8 years, the number of average shows quintupled to 5.87. Sword Art Online back then set a standard for all isekai to come. Some rose to the occasion and exceeded those standards, but most couldn't. I think Mood on TV describes it best.
You can still create a story in classical Japan about a potato farmer, but if you call it fantasy, maybe throw in a smartphone or two, then nobody can really question it. Therefore, isekai was a really accessible writing medium for amateur writers, and thanks to the internet, everybody can get the stories out there.
With more competition, most are bound not to attract an audience. What was once an oligopoly became a near-perfect competition. But Sword Art Online is one of those shows that stand out among the rest despite being nearly a decade old. Riki Kawahara's tale of how he created Sword Art Online is a true underdog story. He started from nothing, with zero writing experience. During his college years, Kawahara was part of the Manga Studies Club. He didn't do any writing and instead focused his attention towards drawing illustrations. At a certain point, he actually wanted to draw manga, but it was too much for him due to the hoops he had to jump through before getting his idea on paper. Then, Kawahara turned to just making stories. It was something he found to enjoy, and so he started to take it seriously. The very first work he made was the Sword Art Online submission for the 9th Dengeki Game Novel Prize. Remember how he was denied from submitting it due to it being over 120 pages over the page limit? Well, he was actually unable to abridge it due to him not having the skills to make it shorter. Posting his unsubmitted novel for all to see was the next best thing. After he did so, the rest is history. According to the website Journal of Geek Studies, Sword Art Online was born out of the actual user participation in the creation and dissemination of the media content. The success of Sword Art Online has contributed to the creation of many write-your-own fiction websites in Japan over the past years. Kawahara was the person who spearheaded SAO while other people backed him up in making the series. This shows us not only the way the novel was written was very peculiar, but that style helped introduce a different type of literature in Japan. In 2009, Kawahara decided to create light novels of his original series. He worked alongside an illustrator named Abeck to help make the art. Sword Art Online began publication on April 10, 2009. I want to point out how Kawahara wrote the initial story. He played many MMO games, but he was never an elite player in any of them. Kawahara was envious of those players who were. He wanted to write SAO from the perspective of mid or low level players and how they see the cream of the crop. Kirito was a character created from Kawahara's own idealistic version of himself. It really shows with his characteristics in the game. Eventually, 2011 arrived, and at the Dengeki Bunko Autumn Festival, Sword Art Online, alongside Kawahara's other series Excel World, were revealed to be having anime adaptations. They were also both confirmed of having video game adaptations as well. They were soon released as Sword Art Online Infinity Moment and Excel World Awakening of the Silver Wings. To commemorate, special bags were given out during the event. For Kawahara, this is where his career began to take off. Let's fast forward to the present day. The light novels are still being made, with new volumes being published twice a year. It boasts over 20 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling light novel series of all time. There are many spin-offs of the series as well. With the anime, the series became universally popular. It even got to have a spin-off, 2 movies with one in production, and a live action in development. The Sword Art Online video game franchise is very popular too, with over a dozen of them being produced. The sheer number of games created is insane. Reki Kawahara started from nothing, but his love for creating stories and characters propelled him and his series to great heights. Some of his other works include the aforementioned Excel World and The Isolator. However, those don't come close to what SAO has done and become. Through all the love and hate that Sword Art Online gets, it's still a juggernaut of a franchise. There are so many games, merchandise, and books. It's so popular, yet the reception is so mixed. SAO has been in a state of limbo for almost a decade. I would compare the ratings to something of a bell curve, with it representing people's reviews. I find this to be accurate because most people wouldn't say that it's the bottom of the barrel or a crowning achievement. People will likely lean toward one side more than the other, but not all the way. In a video by Mother's Basement, he interviews the English cast of Sword Art Online Alicization. There was a part that really stood out to me. It was when they were asked to answer if they've experienced more positivity or negativity from people who've seen the show and what kind of impact it's had. Bryce Papenbrook, the voice of Kirito, had this to say.
I think whether you love the show or you hate the show, you have to appreciate what it's done for the anime community and the industry in general. Just, it has been the gateway show for so many people. And I feel like it has kind of broadened the audience, and that has led to the creation of more anime.
SAO is one of the most interesting anime to come out due to how it's perceived. It's fascinating to see how popular it got with the division it created. Although there was such a divide, it created such a huge impact on the anime industry as a whole. It's simply remarkable what SAO has accomplished. Sword Art Online is, in a sense, an underdog, just like its creator. No matter if you love it or hate it, you can't deny the tremendous ripples it made. It's a monumental milestone in anime that has been talked about very frequently for the past decade and will be talked about for more years to come. I firmly believe that Sword Art Online is one of the best things to happen in anime.